Please join me in a standing toast to our honored guest, Al Leighton. Here, here. And now, as Al would say, let's dig in. How's it now? What'd you say? No, oh, you're non-conformist. All right. As you can see from the program, and I guess I'm going to suspect that Jeem's fine wording of raconteurs here, that's a good word, I hope, for what we're going to do this afternoon. When I first went to work in the woods, I didn't know too much about what was going on, and I was very interested and very impressed with the long evening discussions out at the camp as to the appropriate thing that one should put on their feet. And there were very serious discussions of bean boots and packs, or insulated packs, or sorels, or something. This was all very interesting to me, and I guess I probably bought one of each.
Closet full.
and then I met Al Leighton, and we were out in the woods one day. It was rather wet, and I noticed he wore sneakers. And I observed this during the day, and it seemed to me his feet got quite wet. And that evening I commented, and I said, don't your feet get wet? He says, yes, but the water runs out. I've spent 30 years pondering that bit of wisdom. For a little more wisdom about Al Leighton, Henry Van de Bogart is your first raconteur. Come on up, Henry.
It's the first time I've had that word used in connection with me. I'm a bull artist. Long about 71, I met Al Leighton. And since that time, building up this logging museum has been interesting. We worked together. Maines was the one that pushed me into it. And then Paul Atwood said, I want you on the board. Well, of course, I felt flattered. So I got on the board. And one day, Al and I decided we wanted to go down Blackman Stream from the pond. So we took an aluminum boat, and we're gradually going down the stream, taking in all the sights, which weren't much, except a lot of deadwood on the side, and a lot of water and weeds. But it was about 20 feet wide. We got down almost to where our museum is today, and crash, bang, the boat stopped. We'd run into a roll dam. We didn't know what a roll dam was, but we ran into it. It was 6 inches under the water, and Al was standing in the bow. We damn near went right in. You could visualize that. We were moving about 6 miles an hour. Well, anyway, that was the beginning. What were we doing there? He wanted to see what it looked like coming from the water, and he wanted to measure in front of the dam. Of course, the dam was just a wreck, but anyway, he wanted to measure the water. So we finally got there, and the dam that we ran into had been built by the city of Brewer to supplant the water supply in the event of a big fire. They didn't use the water regularly, but they had it. And also, that same dam stored water for the town of Oregon. And the University of Maine students called it Chemo beer, because it had a slight brown look. From the beginning of 1960, the logging group, mostly formed by paper company employees or woods-related people, we were a motley crew of volunteers who would meet to clear brush from our Leonard's Mills site of the future mill. We didn't call it Leonard Mills at that time, we just called it the site. Well, each year we'd assemble out there, and of course many of you remember that. Paul Atwood came aboard, and he seemed to be the one with the big push. He'd go right ahead and build, whether he consulted anybody or not. But it worked. And he got us, the first thing we had to do was build footings. I'll never forget that. A footing, God, we went all 1 year building footings. Just digging out the ground and pouring in cement. Well, that was the beginning. On top of that, we built cement walls. That was another year. And the next year, we put stone over it to fake it. It looks like it was all stone. Eventually, we did get title to the land, and building started in earnest. And volunteer crews performed great service. We all had a lot of fun working, too. And some of the volunteers really like to tell about it. On our living history days, many families came out, prodded by their children. So their children have helped us. And all we had at the time was an old barn and a poor dam. Kids came in great numbers and cooked out lunch. And Al would call me and ask me, can you go out and meet the school bus? Sure, I could go out, because I didn't have much to do. I was retired. So this was around 78 and 9. And I would go out there, and they'd cook out. The only thing that worried me was, geez, they're going to get all the fires out. They'd have a big fire, and they'd cook hot dogs, as you probably know. And I was there mostly to see that they got the fires out, and then I came home. That's how I started to be a guide. One summer, I think it was 1984, Al called me up and he says, look, I bought a table. A table? We've got an old door we can make into a table. Oh no, I got a new table. I want to put it out front of the Phoenix Inn. I want you out there with a model of the mill trying to get passers-by interested. So there I am out there in front of the Phoenix Inn. And sometimes they had a band playing out there. Sometimes they didn't. But finally I got sick of that, and I got a young fellow from Hamden, Scoop. Paid him a little money, and he'd stay out there Saturday. I got out of it. Well, along 1980, one day Al called up. He says, I want you as treasurer. I said, me as treasurer? Boy, they didn't know. He didn't know me too well. Jesus, anyway, I ended up as treasurer. So I found a notebook, like we used to call a composition notebook. I lined it. When any money came in the mail, I'd enter it. That was about it. And when I handed that to, I guess it was Jack Donovan, the treasurer later, he was shocked. He was an accountant. And anyway, Donovan watched me working in the corner of the co-office one day at an empty desk. And he says, how would you like it if I took over that? What? Oh, I take over the treasurership. Boy, he says, I'd love it. So I quickly called Al, who was then the president. Al was the president. He says, come over. He came over, and we gave everything to Jack Donovan and made him our treasurer. Now, I can't tell you by what authority we acted, but we did it anyway. And I must say, Donovan, an accountant, has done a fine job. All of us today that have worked with Al know how much we appreciate his leadership and in pushing the museum to the success that we enjoy out there today. Thank you.
Your next raconteur is John Maines. As you know, Al worked for the Great Northern for a little while. He then later moved on to, as it says here, the International Paper Company in Seven Islands, and we'll get to that in a moment. First, John.
That's going to be a hard act to follow. Henry tells some good stories. Where's the lever for the trap door?
Right here.
I've never had the pleasure of working with Al in the woods because I think I was buying pulpwood at the time he was cruising timber. My cruising days were somewhat earlier. But I went to our good friend, Lawrence Hurd. Whenever I want to learn something, find out something, I go to Lawrence. And Lawrence did work with Al and told me a couple of incidents that might be interesting. One was a cruise at Township 10 Range 16 up in the St. John River country. And he and Al were alone, assignment to cruise this town. And figured about 3 weeks was right, and went in, set up camp, and it rained every day for two weeks, and the sun came out one day, and then it rained for the third week. And according to Lawrence, that was one of the most miserable cruise operations that he ever attempted. But they had the very good fortune, both of them, and they're both fairly level-headed, easygoing, get along pretty well, because if that had not been the case, I think only one of them would have come out. I don't know if people are acquainted with what happens when people are put together in the woods with no escape, and after a week or two or three, some very strange things can happen to some very good people, normal people. I've seen it occasionally. But fortunately, they got out, but they had a date. Tom Russell was to pick them up at the St. John River at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a certain date. The problem was they had lost track of the days. And, this did create a problem. And they thought it must be just about out, about the third week of rain. They figured that time to pull the pin, the job was almost completed. A little more work that could be done from the river. And so they went out, 4 o'clock, no Tom Russell, missed that day. And then they thought of an old trapper, lived in a camp a little ways downriver. They said, maybe he's home and maybe he knows what day it is. So we'll get out and see if we can find him. Well, he was there, and he had a 1934 calendar. But all he needed was a few calendars, and he kept reusing them when the days came right for the year in question. So using the 34 calendar, they determined what day it was. And I don't know, Lawrence doesn't remember if they were ahead or behind, but anyhow, they wound up that cruise trip. Another one of his stories has to do with the camp at the Forks of the Machias, lynch camps at the Forks of the Machias, and going in there and finding lace curtains in all of the windows. And this they thought was most unusual for the woods camp. And it wasn't, I guess, till the second or third day they'd been in there that they examined those curtains quite closely, and they found they were snake skins. And the camp had been full of snakes, apparently, and a lot of them had chosen the window areas to shed their skins in. And quite possibly somebody had used them for decoration, too, but he said it was quite effective and quite unusual. Well, Al has certainly done a great job for our museum operation, and his particular strength, I think, has been in the money-raising field, which is most important and which has kept us going. I was interested to see, too, in a recent appraisal of the operation, that the Lombard log hauler was listed as probably our most valuable asset. I hope it'll turn out. I hope we can get some steam running through that thing in time, and have it roaring around in the woods up there. I think that will be an attraction, just as some of the other things that we have going for us. So I want to add my thanks and appreciation to Al Leighton for his service as president of the organization, for the good work that he did in holding things together, keeping them moving, and certainly appreciate very much his leadership, his effort, and particularly his good ability at finding some dollars when we had to have them. Thanks very much, Al.
Next on our agenda is John Sinclair. He's not written in your program, but we asked him to come up next. While he's coming up, I'm going to tell a little story because it ties in with some of the things that Al did while he worked at the Seven Islands. It was sort of known in the company that Al often went out into the woods minimally equipped for potential problems. And I particularly remember the afternoon, I think it was somewhere up around Cliff Lake. It was a beautiful June afternoon, and we were on a fairly old road, and the bottom went out of the road and the car fell in. And we opened up the trunk, and there was a jack. There was a jack, but there was no axe, no shovel, and nothing else. So we got out. It took a little while, but we brigadilled around, and we finally got out. And I thought I would maybe say something to Al that, maybe we should have a shovel or something like that. And he says, yes, but didn't we enjoy the outdoors?
Thank you, Brad. And he has every day. I bring along a briefcase. Okay. I sure will. And I always got instructions from Al. Maybe he'd have done that for me if I'd just looked over. He'd have told me to get closer to the mic. The first thing I want to tell you is that Al Leighton has met many a problem in his life, many serious ones. And I can always remember his answer to serious problems. I'd look at him and say, Al, what are we going to do? He said, I don't know. That problem there, he said, is like sewing a button on a custard pie. You just think about that sometime. I've worked with Al for many years, and if there's anybody on this planet who understands the word ecology, Al does and has. The science of relationships between all the plants and the fish and everything else is right down his alley from day one, and it's been an asset to everyone in Maine, and it's been an asset to his family and to all of us. I met him quite a few years ago with Slim Powell at 9 Mile Bridge on the St. John River. And my wife and Mrs. Karen had been out hunting birds, and they had at their limit that day. But Al and Slim come along, and even though they'd been on a cruise party for quite a few days, they didn't have much to eat. But Al had a .22 pistol. But Slim, after asking a few questions, Slim said, yeah, Al was going to feed us with that .22 pistol. But really, he said if he was in a barn and the door's all shut, he couldn't hit it. But Mrs. Karen was a kind lady, and she fed us with a lot of molasses cookies. And we listened to a lot of the good stories, and those were the first I heard from these two gentlemen. And we'll never hear the end of the stories from Slim Powell and Al Leighton. It should go down in history, I hope. Winston Churchill once said, and I have to put this in, it's kind of odd, but I have to put it in. He said to a young man asking advice, looking at the future, he says, study history, study history, study history. And that is exactly what Al Leighton has done for all of us in his time here. And we have so many returns from that we can't even count them. There was one story I have to tell, and I asked Mark if I could tell it. Is it all right, Mark?
Go ahead.
We were up at Baxter State Park in the northeast corner of Matagamon Lake, Al with his family, and I was there with mine, and we were having a real good time. We were going to cross over to the Matagamon site on the other side of the lake, but in the meantime the kids were running around, and Mark was a little anxious to do things. He just wasn't going to sit still. And Al kept reminding him that he had better quiet down a little or something would happen to him. I didn't know what. But the first thing that happened was he got Mark, put him in the canoe and took him over to the island and left him there. Well, on Matagamon Lake, we fought the Battle of the Thoreau Island. It was first called Louse Island because the drivers used to stop there to delouse their equipment. But finally, Thoreau's people got it named through a legislative act as Thoreau's Island. Well, that's fine. We all know where that is. But the next island is not Thoreau's Island. The next island is Mark's Island. And may that go down in history. I think that's about enough for Al today. He's trained us all. He trained his sons and family. And what a wonderful family he has. He'd be extremely proud. And we've been proud of him every day since he's been with us. And we're going to keep in touch. The other day I met him, Mary and I met, he and Sally, and we happened to go out and have lunch. Well, he couldn't keep quiet, so he kept talking about the beautiful trip they had to Scotland. And he said, you know, John, you're a Scotsman, you should go. And so ever since that day, Al's words and Sally's words have been ringing in Mary's ears and my ears, and I'm afraid we might have to go. Thank you.
This is equipment is the request of your official photographer here. Our next rock hunter is well known to all of us who have at any time tied a fly or done any fishing. I can remember, I guess I'd been home from the hospital after I'd had my bypass surgery a week, and Alice was going slightly nuts with me. And she got Al and Fran in to show me how to tie flies. And it was certainly a great saving for me, but even more for Alice. Al has always, of course, been interested in fishing from a very early period in his life, and as you also heard of his interest in canoeing and being on the water in general. So I do have to conclude that the telegram that we received earlier this morning from Bill and Hillary, it was probably mistaken when they said that they had heard with great appreciation his concern with whitewater.
Well, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to stand here and say a few words of some experiences I've had with Al Leighton over the years. Probably I got to know Al in a little different way. I'm not in the forestry business. I was at the university, and I met Al at a conference there around 1970, if I remember correctly. But I could be wrong, because my little gray cells are starting to wind down too. And at that time, Al was in charge of recreational development for Seven Islands Land Company. And I had a bunch of students in a recreation planning class, and we got them up into the North Maine woods for projects. And that's another thing that Al has contributed greatly to, was the organization of the North Maine woods. He's put a lot of hours and effort into that. Another thing you probably don't know is that there's a Trout Unlimited Sunkay Stream chapter here in Bangor, and Al was one of the original organizers and the first secretary of that group back in 1972. Well, anyway, when you work with Al on anything, the subject always turns to fishing some way or another, especially with me. And so we decided we'd take a few fishing trips. Our first one we took, there was Al and Skip Spencer and myself, and we went up to Cottmagomic Lake. Al had some meetings up there at that time. They were held at the old McDougal camps. That was prior to when Seven Islands had their camp. And he said, why don't you guys come along? And after the meetings, he said, we'll do some fishing. So we did. And we went down to Cottmagomic Stream, and we kind of spread out on the stream. And when we got back together, my Lord, Al had all kinds of fish, you know. And so I said, well, what are you using for bait? I mean, what flies are you using? I had tied a bunch of flies, by the way, for each one of us to use. And he said, well, he said, to tell you the truth, he says, I've been using cut bait. And from that day on, Skip and I on a fishing trip with Al always referred to him as Cut Bait Leighton. So I said, well, where are the flies I tie for you? Oh, God, he said, I forgot those at home on a dresser. So I had to use cut bait. And one other trip that we took, Skip and Al and I, and Fred King of Augusta, who has some camps up on Chimquassa, Bamacook, or Ross Lake, we went up on an ice fishing trip. And if any of you have ever camped with Al, he's a tremendous camp cook, I'll tell you. You can go out there, when you come back, even after 3 days, you've put on 5 pounds the way this man cooks. Well, Bud Levitt was supposed to come on that trip that day, and something happened at the last minute. Bud couldn't make it. So he said to Al, he says, Al, take your camera and take a whole lot of pictures of the trip, because that back around 1974, 75, every Saturday he used to have a big page of a photo essay kind of thing called Leisure Outdoors. And he says, I'll use it for my article in the paper, he says, because that's what I was going to do anyway. So we went up and we were ice fishing, and we were catching all kinds of fish, and Al's taking pictures, and it was cold, man, it was cold. It was about 8 above. And that night we come in and the camp was really warm, so I kind of stripped down out of my clothes and just sashayed around in my long johns. And when it came time to do the dishes, I was washing dishes, and Skip was wiping dishes, and Al was kind of sitting there talking with Fred. And so we got back from that trip, and he says, "Where do you see the next Saturday paper?" He says, "You're going to get a kick out of that." So I just happened to have that paper with me. It's dated March 2nd and 3rd, 1974. And there's Al with a nice fish, and there's myself with a fish, and there's Skip Spencer. But what he did that I didn't know was he set his camera up behind me on the table, and he had fast enough film, he didn't need a flash. And there I am doing dishes in my long johns. Well, I've got Al to thank for many, many pleasant memories of those trips, and all I've learned from him in the woods, in the different locations, and the history of those spots. No matter where you go with this man in the woods, he can give you a 20-minute dissertation on the history of that particular spot. And the best to you in the future, Al. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Jack Donovan is next, I think. If I've got the right sheet of paper I'm working from here. I think you took it away from me, Fran. Yeah, there we are. There's well, Jack's coming up. Come on up, Jack, and let me just point out there's a problem with the program here. It says luncheon is provided. Well, now, most of you come from Maine, and of course Al was born in Maine. This is dinner. Luncheon are the 2 meals you have between breakfast and dinner.
I have prepared several things to say, but I just want to talk a little something about what Van had talked about. I had forgotten exactly how I had met Mr. Leighton. Of course, we all know him as Al, but Lee Iacocca labeled us accountants bean counters, which we will never be able to downplay. I'll never forget that time when Van was in the co-office and Mr. Leighton came over, and sure enough, this was a bean counter's nightmare. They actually had a composition book, you know, like when you were in first grade and you were making your letters, A, B, C, and Van actually had that, and they were making an entry. And apparently he had, and I'm going to pick on Ed Giddings even though I can't see, I know he's here, he had apparently got that idea from Ed. So they had it. It was the damnedest thing you ever saw. It was all in longhand. It could be a donation from whoever, and it'll all be written out there. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. But it kind of adds to exactly what the few things I have to say today. Going back into the museum, I mean, this was my first time in community service. So when I got a call a couple of months ago from Gloria Faulkner, and she said that they were going to be having this meeting, I said, well, I'd like to say a few things. I said, because my relationship with Al Leighton is very unique. Everybody kind of knows that we've been working together in administration and finance with the Maine Forest and Logging Museum. Something, you know, like I said, it was my first experience in community service, something I really enjoy, even though unlike all of the people that are ahead of me. I was brought up in right in the city, right outside of Boston, unlike Al, who was brought up in some place called Shirley. Now, I said that to my wife one time. I said, was that his mother's first name? She said, no, that's where he's from. And I said, Shirley. She said, Jack, let me give you an idea. My wife's from Greenville. She said, if you live in Shirley, you go to Greenville Junction for a good time on Saturday night. So like I say, our relationship over these last 12 years has really been unique. Again, I'm going to kind of change the subject quickly from the museum because we've talked a lot about that. And like I said, we've had a lot of behind-the-scenes meetings. We get a lot of things done. There's a tremendous amount of people that do a great job as volunteers. And then annually we have our meeting right here, which I think over the years has been something that we all look forward to. But the relationship that most of you don't know about is Al and I professionally served two very, very famous families. As we all know, Al worked for Seven Islands Land Company for the very famous and powerful Pingree Group. Back in the 1840s, the Pingrees and the company that I represent, the Coes, out of California, started at 116 Hammond Street. And they progressed over the years. Obviously, the Pingree heirs have gone into the timberland business. The Coes primarily went into the business properties as they stand today. But my relationship with Al, when he was the agent for the Pingrees and I as agent for the Coes, we learned a lot more about each other. And I kept thinking the word that really describes our relationship is the word unique. Again, he's from this small community called Shirley in Scottsdale County. I'm from like about 8 minutes outside of Boston. But I've always been very, very proud of our relationship. I've learned a lot from him. And again, with this relationship, we've found out more things about ourselves. One thing I found out about him is, like a lot of people have said, he dearly loves to rough it. A rainstorm, lack of food, mosquitoes, makes no difference. He loves to rough it. My idea of roughing it is slow room service. And after Gloria talked to me, I decided to do a little checking into history. On the agenda today, it talked about Al's incredible career in the timberland business. Well, I don't know if many of you people know about the Coes, but the Coes never throw anything out, nothing. I went back to the files, found a payroll entry for Al Leighton, 1964. Now, the good news is, Al, you didn't pick up your last check. Now, I talked to Cliff about this, and he verifies that you all got $9 a month. Now, with interest, that comes to $17,164. But I know you're not a man who cares about money, so with the permission of the Coe family, what we would like to give Al today is a history of the Coe family, who, like himself, are very proud of a lot of community service that they have done in California. They have a museum in San Jose, 67,000 acres of wild areas where you can have fishing, backpacking. It's a wonderful, wonderful area, and it has, I think, a lot to do with the community-minded service of individuals like Al Leighton. So what we would like to do in lieu of a paltry check, we would like to give this to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all of your support and appreciation from the Coe family. Thank you.
While Bob Frank is coming up to the podium, I'll tell you that it was a forester that went into Dysart's early one morning to order breakfast, which consisted of 2 headlights, 4 tires, a quart of oil, and a tank of gas. And the waitress obviously brought out 2 eggs sunny side up, 4 donuts, large coffee, and a plate of beans. Now, I want you to know that was not Al Leighton. Now, first of all, he would never be so flip about beans. And secondly, he takes great pride in the fact that beans prepared the Leighton way do not build up gas.
Thank you, Brad, for that one. Al, I'm very pleased to be on this program for your luncheon, but this is not only Al's day, this is Al's organization, and you are his people. I'm going to change the tempo a little bit and try to tie together the organization that Al has brought forth. And I break it down into 3 eras: pre-1979, 1979 to 1991, and post-1991. Pre-1979. This was the era of the birth of an idea, a water-powered sawmill, possibly a museum. This was the era of the founding of the Forest and Logging Museum. This was also the era of the early establishment of an educational and historic endeavor. It was also the era of the selection of and access to a practical site rich in historical significance. And lastly, for this pre-1979 era, it was a successful beginning of the Maine Forest and Logging Museum. Now, for a moment, let me skip over the second era, 1979-1991, and let's become present. This will be the era, I believe, of sharper focusing, where we go from 1991 and where we go from today. What exactly and ultimately should the Maine Forest and Logging Museum be like in the year 2000 and beyond? How large should we be? And we will accept a master plan to help guide us. This will also be the era, I believe, of an increase in on-site development at Leonard's Mills. It will also be the era of an increase in appropriate and accurately defined and displayed programs of historic significance. This will be the era, I believe, of the establishment of both an office staff, including an executive director and curator, and a Leonard's Mills staff functioning together and capable of carrying forth the mission of the museum with continued assistance from able members and volunteers. But now, let's go back to Al's era, 1979, 1991, you will. In fact, these were the years that he served as our president. This was the era of the development of an idea, the Living History Forest and Logging Museum, second to none, and Al always said we will be second to none, to honor Maine's wood products workers and industries and Maine's extensive forests, and to preserve and demonstrate Maine's forest heritage, thereby educating present and future generations of Maine people and people from other places. This was the era of the continuation of the beginning and further establishment of an administratively viable organization, including bylaws, election of officers, directors, corporators, and that still confuses people, Al. What are corporators? An earnest budget process, appropriate accounting procedures. We have gotten over the hurdle. The beginning of a worthy fundraising program, the establishment of a corps of volunteers of exceptional talent and dedication, and a membership base of approximately 700 individuals and organizations. This was the era of focusing on what the Maine Forest and Logging Museum should consist of, what structures are appropriate, where should they be located, and although this process seldom evoked unanimous consent, this was the era of initial serious and significant on-site construction. But most of all, this was the era of Alan S. Leighton. He was instrumental in developing the idea. He provided the determination in establishing the administrative functions. He provided the leadership in focusing on what the Maine Forest and Logging Museum should one day become. Thank you, Al. I would not trade those early days, those early years for anything. I have shared with you friendship as well as being an officer, director, and with many committee responsibilities. But you made it happen, and we all thank you for it, Al.
As I conclude my responsibilities here at the podium, we have, besides the spurious telegram I referred to earlier, we also have a message from Ed Meadows expressing his regret. Al, he was not able to hear today, giving you his very best. And we also have a written communication from Sherm Perkins, which I've just given to Al. Before I conclude, I would think that a round of applause for the people who put all of this together, Jean Tobridge, Gloria Faulkner, Fred Knight, Joe Coffin, Sue Jensen, Barb McGowan, and if there are others that I missed, I apologize to you, but thank you. I think this was a lovely, lovely dinner. And so I conclude with my best wishes to Al and to Sally, and turn it now over to your president, Dave Edson.
Thank you, Brad, and thanks to all the individuals who have taken the time to prepare statements and to celebrate Al's contribution to both Maine and to the Maine Forest and Logging Museum. And thanks also to all of you for taking the time to come. It's very gratifying to see so many people turn out on a wonderful day like this. I'm going to ask Bob Vigu at the back to lock the door and make sure that all these people sign up as volunteers to the museum. Is that okay with you? Having started life as a history major, my interest in the museum has given me an opportunity to practice something that I was never able to make any money at. So history is a lot of fun, and in the instance of the Maine Forest and Logging Museum, sociologists refer to volunteer organizations as providing us with a sense of community that we sometimes don't get in our cities and our towns. Fortunately, scientists haven't been able to figure out exactly scientifically what the reasons are for that, but I'm a little old-fashioned in as much as I believe that if the sky's blue, I don't need to know why. I appreciate that, and by the same extent, I appreciate individuals who are willing to volunteer and contribute. I will respect the privacy of their reasons. Now, I've got one award here for Al that I'm going to pass to him, sort of as a little icebreaker. There have been many comments about his talents in this regard. This is the first bona fide recognition of a beanhole bean master. And I know Al is very pleased to have his son David stepping into the pot, as it were. It's been fun in my very brief involvement in the museum watching the popularity of the beans, and there's always a bit of panic about whether the fire's been started, and got to have the right amount of firewood. These people love to plan months in advance. Of course, you get the wood and you split it and you stack it, and then you worry about digging out the hole. And recently we've acquired some wonderful pots, so we can feed what is it, 100 people per pot? Is it something on the order of that? And we have all sorts of wonderful recipes for preparing the beans, and then we stand back and watch them come. And instead of miles per gallon, it's how many people per pot, I guess, we feed. That's the lighter side of Al's involvement in the museum. That's the tangible aspect. I think the larger role is the one which so many of you have referred to. It's a role which I think is remarkable because he has persisted in the face of many, many obstacles. I've watched him as he was tested by the Maine DEP and as he was challenged by members and fellow volunteers. Al has been charged with steering a course which he felt preserved the future of the museum. And contrary to the advice of many, he's persisted with a very stubborn determination, without a fear of risking his popularity and without compromising his vision of Leonard's Mills. Years of dedication have become decades, and many, many ideas have become money and energy to build what is Leonard's Mills today and what will become a larger and more diverse Leonard's Mills in the future. That determination elevates Al into a special category of volunteer, that tenacious and resolute individual who will prevail come the DEP or high water. The Maine Forest and Logging Museum recognizes, and I know you join us all in recognizing, Al's determination and generosity. And as a way of doing that, I need some assistance from Brad here. Hold that one. We are proposing to name, in his honor, the Al Leighton Visitors Center. This building hasn't been designed, it hasn't been built, the money hasn't been raised, but sounds familiar, right? It'll be there. But you heard him say it, it'll be there. This building will be built to continue and to expand the educational and historical mission which Al has helped to launch. And it seems a fitting tribute to a gentleman who's given so much to so many. Would you all please join me in recognizing Al? It's your turn to take some pot shots at the people who...
I'm ready. For the last few weeks, whenever I've seen Brad Woolman, he's kind of muttered that there's going to be a roast. Well, I can live with everything that's been said here today, I think. The only, and this visitor center thing really kind of bowls me over. And but I appreciate this lunch, I really, really do. And I'm glad to see so many familiar faces here. Your timing could have been a little bit better. I've had a bad case of sinusitis, and if I'd had a couple more days, it would have been all over. And I wouldn't have had to worry about losing my voice. But I'd like to say just a few words about how I feel this Leonard's Mills and the museum went together in the last part of the 80s. There have been three very distinct areas of effort. Number one has been administration and fundraising. The other thing has been the construction at Leonard's Mills, Paul Atwood's thing. But in between, the volunteers and their programs. And all three of these efforts, we have had a nucleus of people who make things happen. And that's the whole secret of our museum. People that make things happen. And it's all gone together. And I want to thank all of you very much.
I'd like to thank Brad for being the master of ceremonies, and certainly like to thank Al and Sally for coming, and Al's family for taking the time to show up. And you're going to have us out at the museum in, what, about a week, Vernon? Starting to clean up? So, thank you all for coming.